Jodi, I want to ask you, like, because we kind of touched on it with your bio, but sort of the catalyst and the story that kind of brought you to the forefront to engage politically. And, it's kind of been a big part of your journey. Do you mind kind of talking about that
Not
story and then kind of maybe like connect it to kind of where it's led you now?
For sure. I think, and just to preface it, it's a story that I share like constantly, like over and over and over again. I think it took me a long time to really be able to do it because there is so much stigma built up around it. But that's why I am so grateful for activists and advocates who really lifted up my voice in the first place and made me feel like I was a valid human being whose, experience mattered. And, Corey's experience mattered, right? But so essentially what happened was, we were living out in California, my fiance at the time and I, we were essentially, recreational drug users, right? One of the things that we had access to just by virtue of people that we knew and, it didn't really seem like too big of a deal at the time was OxyContin. So this is about oh my God, it's 17 years ago now, 16, 17 years ago. And so, something that, we kind of had this back and forth where we'd be like, we go get one and split one or whatever. And then we'd go a couple of days and whatever. Well, then I got pregnant. And when I got pregnant, that's a hard stop, y'all. Like whatever is going into my body is going to my baby. And so like my choice at that point was, no, I don't want to pass something on to my baby because I wanted to have that baby. So I stopped, right? It was not necessarily easy, but it was a choice. Like I felt like if I made the choice to have the baby, I didn't want to do that. And so I was able because I had a biological imperative based on my choice. So I stopped. And at that time, it was harder for Corey. And so we ended up moving back to Boston and there were just like a lot of odd things that were happening where I knew, Corey wasn't being honest with me, but I didn't know exactly what it was. I thought he was cheating on me because that's what you go to, right? Which is kind of funny. Like if Corey and I, it's kind of like little saga there. That was a pretty weird, that wouldn't happen. But anyway, or I hope it wouldn't happen. But anyway, thinking back on it. And one night, Corey was pulled over and he was pulled over by the Massachusetts State Police. And they said they smelled marijuana and Corey was acting funny. Now, a friend of ours had come to visit a couple of days before, and there was like this kind of like hush hush where I knew I wasn't getting the full story of what was happening. Later on that night, Corey calls me up. I cannot even describe because Corey was like my big, strong. I literally called him my big, strong, handsome man, and he calls me up. Turns out he's at the state police barracks and this big, strong, handsome man just completely broken down. I mean, to hear his voice on the phone and just the way that, anyway, I couldn't even reconcile like the person who was talking to me on the other end being Corey. And the next morning when I saw him at court, when we, posted bail and all that kind of stuff, I mean, it was the visual version of like what I had heard on the phone, completely just broken down man. He told me about, of course, so when he was pulled over, he had, I can't remember exactly what the number was now, but he had a small amount of heroin and he had a whole bunch of pills. And he was just completely broken. I remember walking back to the car after leaving the thing. And of course, breaking away from family. So it's just the two of us walking towards our car and everything. And I remember him literally just breaking down. Now, mind you, my big, strong, handsome man, my protector, right? Breaking down with both of his hands holding my one hand and begging my forgiveness. And this is, he just looks, just everything. I don't know how to explain that to you, but I remember that so clearly in my mind. Because as he explained to me, like the way he was treated, we want to talk about dehumanization. It was just instantly like, you are a drug addict. And so now you deserve no respect and no dignity and all of that. And so that was the experience that he was describing to me. So Corey actually pretty privileged person in that respect, as far as, getting treatment and all of that kind of stuff. He was able to access treatment. He was able to go to McLean Hospital for, for rehab and detox and all this stuff, doing the 90 meetings in 90 days. And he's really trying to do, but he's doing all this because he's facing, it actually started as a 15-year mandatory minimum. So he's facing a 15-year. This is based on the quantity of drugs that he had, the quantity of pills that he had. And it's just like, okay, 0 to 50. This is 5 years. 50 to 100. This is 10 years. 100 to 200, I think it was. This is mandatory minimum 15 years. So I'm sure you're familiar with what a mandatory minimum is, but it takes it completely out of the judge's hand. It says, no matter what, if someone is caught with this, then they are going to jail for that amount of time. So during the trial, now, mind you, at this point, we had a newborn baby. Corrado was, I think at the time he was pulled over, it was like 2-3 months. I remember going to like rehab at McLean there was like a Patriots game and, like whatever. And I don't even think he could stand yet. So he was like a couple of months. And so, and during this time, while Corey was going through the trial and everything, I became pregnant and found out I was pregnant again. That's our younger son. So imagine being in the position where you are facing a 15-year mandatory minimum. You have one newborn child. Now, I'll tell you something about Corey. I don't know if it's something about like he's got this big Italian family, and this is the whole thing is you take care of your family. And that's the mission, right? It's to be like this family man and whatever. And that's what he always wanted, right? So now he's found, okay, this is the person he's going to marry. We're going to start a family. We were planning our wedding, like all of this stuff. And suddenly you're facing a 15-year mandatory minimum, watching your two children through glass for 15 years, right? So he's doing all of these things because he had to satisfy the court, right? He's doing all of these things but he's still under the threat of just this horrible, horrible existence for the next 15 years. So you put somebody in that position, you say like, all right, well, you need to recover now. And then there's this is the threat that you're hanging over their head. And so, Christmas Eve, 2008, Corey walked into the bathroom. I remember telling him my Christmas miracle story. I remember that the night before he told me that he loved me twice, which was really weird. Like he told me he loved me all the time, but it was just thinking about later and thinking about that he actually said it twice. And he stood in the doorway of our bathroom and listened to my Christmas miracle story, whatever. And very patiently and kindly waited for me to finish the story before going into the bathroom. And about, 15 minutes later or something like that, my brother yelled down to me about something, from upstairs. And I hollered to Corey to ask him a question. He didn't answer the question. It was actually about an egg sandwich. But whatever. And he didn't answer. And for some reason, I thought he was mad at me because I was like vacuuming and that woke him up kind of thing. And for some reason, I'm thinking like he's mad. And it took me a minute to be like, he's not answered. So I said, like, Corey, please answer me. Like, you're scaring me now, And my son, this little baby boy is banging on the bathroom door, da, da, da. And I realized that I wasn't hearing anything and that he would have answered me. You know what I mean? He would have answered me, at least when I said, even if he was mad at me, he would have answered me. And so I busted in the door, all 9 months pregnant of myself, busted in the door, and I found Corey unresponsive. And he died. He overdosed. They tried to revive him. I think back on that a lot. If I had actually, we have Narcan now. Like we had it then, but it wasn't widely available. It wasn't something that you would keep at home. Nowadays, if you have someone, if you know someone in your family who, suffers from substance use disorder, then, that's what you do. But anyway, if I had that access, maybe I could have saved him. Right. But I didn't. I did, CPR was the best thing that I could do. And we lost. And so after that, of course, I spent a good 5 years just really, this is the thing about telling the story, right? Is because like I knew about the stigma. I had the idea of the stigma. And so I spent a very long time just telling my kids all these stories about Corey, because I wanted to tell them about their dad before the world got a chance to tell them about like the stigma. I wanted them to know how amazing of a human being he was, and that they were made in love, and that he loved the shit out of them. And he would, that all he wanted to do was be there for them before they fully understood what it was that took his life, and before people started saying those things, and judging in that way. So I kind of kept myself in grief for a very long time, because I intentionally did that to make sure that Corey was present in my kid's life, and so that they could understand who he was. Now, it took me being jogged out of that by my son saying to me one day I'm dropping him off at Montclair Elementary, and we're coming down the hill. This is when we lived out in Oakland. We're coming down the hill, and my son says to me, "Mom, I don't think you could love anybody else," out of the blue. And I said, what do you mean I couldn't love anybody else? He says, "No, because you love Daddy too much." And I just, it's funny because these stories you look back on and you think like, oh, well, I could have said this. I could have said this. But I was actually pretty happy with what I said. I said, "Honey, I have a whole lot of love. I got love for everybody." You know what I mean? Like I have so much love. It's unlimited. So you don't worry about that. But I realized that I was keeping myself in this space and all that kind of stuff. So to kind of jump forward a little bit, I think, at the time, this was when Oxy and the opiate overdose crisis was hitting my neck of the woods. It was hitting the suburbs. It was unbelievable. There were hundreds and hundreds of people, if not thousands, at his wake and at his funeral. I mean, because this was somebody who is a good, a good kid from a good family, and, white kid in the suburbs and all that kind of stuff. And it just shocked the hell out of everybody. You know what I mean? It was a real wake up call. And so I think, really later on, and of course it just boom, boom, boom. I mean, I swear to God, there were some times when I was going to a funeral or a wake every other week for somebody I graduated with, or somebody it just ran rampant through our town, and it still is pretty bad. But I think, this was kind of at the beginning of it. So kind of a couple of years went past, and like I said, I was just like in that, grief headspace. And kind of when I came out and things cleared up a little bit, I'm looking around and I'm going, nothing has happened. You know what I mean? We had like the president, stand up and say, we need to do something and address this thing. And, and I'm wondering like, wait, what are we doing? But people are still dying. It's getting worse. It's getting worse all the time. How can it still be getting worse all the time? And so that was kind of what set me on the track of, getting politically minded about it. Because, we set the conditions for people, right? So we can do personal responsibility all we want, but we have a society and we set the conditions in which this is happening. And like I said earlier, if you have a system that the output is this, then you go back to the system and you figure out what's going wrong and you fix that, right? And so it got me looking to the system and saying like, okay, well, what are we actually doing for people? Does this criminal justice approach, is that actually helpful, or is it harmful? And, really looking into the evidence as of the last, few years, especially, looking into the evidence about, what really produces the best results, what approach really produces the best results. And if we actually want to save lives, then how do we change the system so that it's actually saving lives at the end of the day? So this was one of many issues that I got really into and concerned about. But this was kind of like the thing that really got me looking into politics and a lot of different issues, because once I realized that this didn't make any sense. Why are we doing this? And then of course, Purdue Pharma and all these other kind of things that contributed to this. And you're thinking like, well, how did these laws get made, or how are these people not having any consequences, but we're all dying, and all that kind of stuff. And that's what led me to the, following the money in politics thing and saying like, wow, that's funny. Well, Purdue Pharma, pharmaceutical industry is a big spender in Washington. And what do you know? They're getting, like all this kind of stuff. And then of course that leads you to different issues. That leads you to other issues. And you say, well, why doesn't this make sense? And why doesn't this make sense? And at the heart of it, where really what it came back to was you got big money people and they're making out just fine and everybody else is suffering. And, it comes down to what people are spending in elections and that kind of stuff. And so that got me into what I really was my first form of activism, which was Wolfpack, which was the trying to get money out of politics, because I felt that you got fires burning all over the place, but what's feeding the fire, right? And so you address the issue that's feeding the fire. And then beyond that, of course, I got connected with Rights and Democracy here in New Hampshire and Vermont. And they are, I should say we, because now I'm actually employed by them. I volunteered with them for the last 5 or 6 years on a variety of issues, healthcare mostly, and the opiate crisis, the overdose crisis, and also connected to People's Action on a national level, and Center for Popular Democracy to do national things, and really lifting up people who, like I was talking about in the beginning, the people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And that means something. And what that means is essentially what I explained in the very beginning, is that you can't make policy that actually benefits people and actually lifts people up unless you're listening to those people. And so what Rights and Democracy's whole mission is about is lifting up people who are actually struggling individuals and families, who are suffering the brunt of the negative effects of the policy that we craft in Washington or in Concord or, whatever. And having those people bring their stories, having those people providing a platform through which they can talk to their legislators and have some type of influence, kind of getting around this money in politics thing. And so that we can build power, grassroots power, and the people, not the people who have the luxury to do it, but the people like me who never would have stood up and said anything, because not only did Corey deal with that stigma, and not only was that, whatever, but like understanding the way that played out in my life and the way that it played out in my kid's life. And what that does is it makes you not want to speak up. I'm sorry, I'm emotional. It's going to happen. But it makes you feel like your voice doesn't matter. And what Rights and Democracy and what Wolfpack, what they did was they made me realize that my voice does matter. And not only does my voice matter, not only do I have something to say and am I capable to say it and capable to make an argument and capable to craft legislation and work on legislation, be in committee and have that conversation. Not only am I capable of doing that, I have the values, I have the understanding that I need to enlist people on the grassroots, on the ground level, the people who are actually dealing with the policy, and bring their voices to that. So regaining my sense of self-empowerment just makes me want to spread it to other people. Does that make sense? And so now being in politics, there's an activist, there's an advocate, and there's a politician. All of these entities and all of the groups surrounding them all work together. You can't pass policy unless you have the people who are going to back you up, unless you have the people who are going to show up to testify, unless you have the experts, the advocates, and things like that who are going to show up to testify, who are going to have your back, who are going to talk to people in your community and build support for you. None of them can do it alone. None of us can do it alone. So what I see myself as doing right now is I'm not leaving the activist. I'm not leaving the organized one, but I'm trying to step into a different capacity and like a puzzle, say, all right, this is where I can fit in. How can I do the most good in that role? So that's where I'm at.